From WikiLeaks to Edward Snowden to a German newspaper that has a knack for leaking top secrets, there is no shortage of huge information leaks we have seen throughout our history. Let's take a look at some of the largest scandals as we cover the top 10 unsettling leaked secrets that changed the world. In our number 10 spot, we have the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo. This leaked secret got leaked all the way back in 1848 by a reporter named John Nugent. John published in the New York Herald an unsigned copy of this treaty, which would conclude the Mexican-American War. He published the entire thing, which included the negotiations for peace before they were settled or agreed upon. The United States Senate tried as hard as they could to get John to reveal his source, even going as far as to basically place him on a sort of house arrest, but he wouldn't crack. Investigations continued on for long after the leak, and it is widely believed that at the time, the Secretary of State James Buchanan, who would go on to become president a decade later, was the source of the leak, but this has never been proven. This was a very early demonstration and establishment of what goes on behind the scenes with politicians and the media. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Paradise Papers. After being taken from the offshore law firm Appleby and being leaked by a South German newspaper, these documents would reveal the nearly $10 trillion that were put into offshore investments, which were intended to hide the wealth and profit of many individuals, as well as to avoid taxes. Among those listed in the documents are Queen Elizabeth II, former US Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, along with Facebook and Nike. This is just a few that are named on the 13.4 million confidential documents. There are many shocking revelations within these documents, including some that might allude to some other, even more shady dealings. Some of these documents were first released into the public domain on November 5th, 2017, and ever since then, more stories have been coming out as people continue to comb through the mass amount of documents. For some of those involved in the stories that have been released, there have been scandal, litigation, and loss of position for some of those named, as well as litigation against some of the journalists and the media who leaked the stories and published the papers. In our number 8 spot today, we have caller information. This is just one part of the many things that were leaked by Edward Snowden back in 2013. In that year, it was reported by The Guardian that, according to the documents that were leaked by him, the Obama administration has allowed the NSA to collect different caller information from Verizon. This was done through what was called a quote business records provision of the Patriot Act that was established under the presidency of George W. Bush. It allowed the government to order Verizon to hand over call information every day. This information included things like the time, location, and the duration of the call. The information began being collected under the Bush administration in 2001, and they were collected from AT&T, Verizon, and Bell South. Of course, once these documents were leaked and this information became public knowledge, US officials began trying to reassure the public that this surveillance was somehow necessary and was actually a program vital to national security, but many people felt like the spying was an unnecessary invasion of their privacy. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Pentagon Papers. In June of 1971, the New York Times published a few different excerpts that were taken from a top secret Department of Defense report that pertained to the United States and their involvement in the Vietnam War from 1945 to 1967. These papers were created as a part of a study by the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, and the reason they were so important and secret is because they revealed that 4 consecutive presidential administrations had lied to and misled both Congress as well as the American people about the involvement in the war. Daniel Ellsberg, who is said to have been a military analyst who opposed the war, leaked these confidential government records, and him, as well as the New York Times and the Washington Post, all faced criminal charges in court for their efforts to get the papers into public knowledge, but in a turn of events, the charges were later dismissed. Not only were these papers important, but the leak was a crucial moment in time because it bred major distrust in the United States government that would only go on to grow. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Iraq war logs. This is a leak that came in 2010 and it appeared on WikiLeaks. If unfamiliar, this was a website created by Julian Assange in 2006 with the goal of quote analysis and publication of large datasets of censored or otherwise restricted official materials involving war, spying, and corruption. With a description like that, you know this leak was a big one. So on this site, there were leaks of around 400,000 different US military documents that were now accessible to the public, and within these documents, the details of the Iraqi civilian deaths, the horrible treatment of war prisoners, and Iran's involvement in the war all came to light. At the time, this was the largest US military leak ever, and it was a huge deal. However, prior to this leak being made public, the information was not organized or analyzed, which had many journalists calling it irresponsible. These documents had people worried because they suggested evidence that there were crimes being ignored and that deaths were being covered up with numbers being edited. To this day, many officials have condemned this leak, saying that it put people's lives at risk. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Panama Papers. Remember that German paper from the Paradise Paper leaks? Well, turns out they are very involved in the leaking of documents, as they also have a hand in this one. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, along with this German paper, released 11.5 million documents that detailed different offshore tax havens. The papers were shared with the newspaper anonymously, so it's not exactly known who the source of the leak is, but the newspaper needed a year in order to decipher the encrypted files they were given before they could be released to the public. In 2016, the papers were published, which showed some of the private financial information of different celebrities, politicians, as well as business leaders from around the globe. A lot of the information in the papers might have been interesting and eye-opening, but the majority of it wasn't illegal, just maybe a little shady. There were, however, 2 arrests that were made due to this leak, and they were for wire fraud, tax evasion, and for forming a criminal organization, and some of those involved in the arrests lost their businesses because of it. In our number 4 spot today, we have PRISM. This is another one of the leaks that was made by Edward Snowden, and it involves a PowerPoint presentation, but this wasn't just my 6th grade PowerPoint on elephants, it was a presentation that involved the NSA. The slideshow was one that was used to help train intelligence personnel, and it detailed the United States and their involvement in a secret program called PRISM. This program was the NSA's effort to collect a ton of data from internet companies. The data ranged from email content to search histories to file transfers. The reason this PowerPoint was so important is because it confirmed that the NSA had access to the servers of major US internet service providers like YouTube, Google, Skype, and Apple. PRISM first began in 2007 with Microsoft and expanded to Apple in 2012. When leaked, Snowden warned that the extent of this data collection was a lot greater than the public even knew, and that it included what he called, quote, dangerous and, quote, criminal activities. This leak also coincided with a meeting between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and former US President Obama. The meeting was already heated as it was in relation to cyber spying between the 2 countries. The meeting was focused on the United States and their accusations against China, but after the leak, the US had little credibility left in the meeting. China was adamant that they too had been a subject of this data collection, and the EU countries were later brought into the mix, with European citizens beginning to fear that they were also being targeted. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Pandora Papers. One of the most recent leaks on this list today took place in October of 2021, and again involves the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Last year, they had published the first leaks of what would end up being 12 million documents, which detailed the dealings of some of the world's wealthiest individuals, including political leaders. The papers revealed their secret offshore accounts that were being used in order to evade taxes, and the consortium has called their investigation into this the, quote, most expansive leak of tax haven files in history. In order for this to come to fruition, they needed the involvement of more than 600 journalists in 117 different countries, which of course makes it clear that many people had a hand in exposing the truth. This leak is said to have made public all the ways in which politics, business, and real estate are impacted by corruption. The leak went on to have quite an influence over the election in the Czech Republic, and it also left more people calling for the government to crack down on things like money laundering and tax evasion and all the other many sneaky ways people have found to hide their wealth. In our number 2 spot today, we have Operation Mincemeat. This one is different from most of the others on this list today, and that is because it was a planned leak that proved that not all leaks are truthful. This leak from the Allied forces during World War II, or really the operation itself, was basically to plant this fake top secret information on a body that just washed up on a beach on the coast of Spain. Basically, this information was intended to lead the into thinking that the Allies were going to invade Greece and Sardinia when the real plan was Italy. British intelligence officers knew they had work to do, and it involved inventing an entire fictional life for the body that was being planted on the beach. There was fake correspondence, and they even went as far as to have a photograph with a fake fiancé. When many people's lives are at risk, cutting corners is not the right idea. In the end, the plan fooled both Spanish authorities as well as German leaders in 1943, who sent all of their troops to Greece. While they did this, the Allied forces invaded Sicily. As the Axis powers began to lose in the Battle of Sicily, the Italian dictator Mussolini was dismissed as the prime minister and subsequently imprisoned. This remains one of the most interesting information leaks in history. In our number 1 spot today, we have Watergate. This is perhaps one of the largest scandals and leaks in history, especially in the history of the United States. In the middle of 1972, there were 5 men who were arrested for breaking into and subsequently trying to bug the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate hotel complex in Washington, D.C. As the year went on, the 1972 presidential election came closer, and there was an anonymous source who went by the name, quote, Deep Throat. Sorry, I can't change history, that's just the name. So this anonymous source fed information to Washington Post reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward that, quote, the Watergate bugging incident stemmed from a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage conducted on behalf of President Nixon's re-election and directed by officials of the White House. Despite this information leak and it being reported in the news, Nixon was still re-elected, but he was also under some serious investigation. There was a series of Senate hearings, and the Senate even went on to create a special investigative committee. The hearings were broadcast nationwide, and they had witnesses testifying that Nixon had approved plans to cover up administration involvement in the break-in, and that there was a voice-activated taping system in the Oval Office. These hearings captured the attention of Americans everywhere for weeks, and in the end, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Nixon had to release these Oval Office tapes to government investigators, which then went on to reveal that he had not only attempted to cover up what went on, but he also later tried to use federal officials to deflect the investigation. Under the threat of an imminent impeachment, Nixon had no choice but to admit his guilt and resign, making him the only president to do so. His successor, Gerald Ford, ended up pardoning him, so he escaped prosecution, but there were 69 other people indicted, with 48 of them later being convicted. Remember that Deep Throat guy who spilled the information in the first place? Well, his identity remained a secret for 33 years until 2005, when former FBI agent Mark Felt revealed himself as the source. This is probably the biggest political scandal in US history, and it revealed corruption beyond what Americans at the time could believe. It truly changed the way people would look at government leaders forever. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thank you so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!